Hi, everybody. My name is Erica Luchik, and I'm the Northwest Regional Specialist for SICM, or Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management. And we are working on the Indiana Invasives Initiative, which is a project throughout the entire state where we are educating people about invasive species and forming invasive species groups that are made up with all different kind of partners, including landowners. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but we're going to get started on the negative impacts of invasive plants. This map above shows how much tallgrass prairie we used to have in the central US. And if you look below it, you may see some yellow specks that are still left, but that is how much tallgrass prairie we have lost. You can't really see any left to this day. So we have impacted our prairie a lot. And then these are some maps that show how we have thinned or removed our forests throughout the US as well. So in the last 300 to 400 years, we've really cleared a lot to make space for ourselves. And I also like to show this photo. It's not a real photo. It's a photo that someone created to show what they thought New York City looked like before we built the city. So I'm not showing these photos as a good or bad thing. It's just to simply show you guys that when humans move into an area, we alter our ecosystem or change those habitats to make it easier for us to live. And just to throw a little humor into it, when we moved into these areas, we kind of changed everything into lawns and made it all garden-like, and we still do that to this day, but we are no longer dressed like this. So why do our yards still look like this? With some current science, we're learning that these yards we have are no longer sustainable, so we do need to make some changes, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So this map just shows in red the federal public land that is available, and most of that is out west. But as you can see, and especially in Indiana, most of the properties are owned by you. It's all private land, so we can make the biggest impact, especially in the eastern US, because we own all that private land. So that's an important thing to think about. So what exactly is an invasive species? It's a species that does not naturally occur in a specific area and whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So there's kind of two parts to that definition. Just remember, it's a species that does not naturally occur here, but it also is causing harm. And they can spread all different ways. It could be by weather or natural disasters. Birds tend to spread invasive species around a lot. They grow aggressively, so it may be spreading by its growth. But the big thing is us. We have brought most of these species here. We continue to plant them. So humans are the ones that are spreading invasives around. And you might recognize this plant in the background. It's periwinkle or vinca, planted in landscaping as a ground cover pretty often. But it may look nice with these nice flowers, but it can take over. So this is a photo of vinca spreading out of a landscaped yard into a forest. And there's really no other plants growing in that understory. It's completely taken over and replaced those natives. So you'll see in this picture as well, you might recognize those trees. Those are Callery pears, also known as Bradford pear, Cleveland pear. They're all the same invasive pear tree. and they are still planted, but this is a photo that shows what damage those trees can cause to our woodlands. They're replacing our natives. So this is just a good example of what damage they can do. And these are simply escapees from our yards. They're creating monocultures, they're altering our natural habitats. So when you're buying plants, it can be a little tricky. You have to be careful, and I'll be honest, you can be an expert and know these plants and they still might be mislabeled. They have multiple plant names, multiple common names, and then with seed mixes, it might say, oh, this is a wildlife blend, great for your native wildlife. But who knows where those seeds are coming from? They could be coming from Europe, so they're technically not native to the US. You could be getting stuff from online sellers. Facebook Marketplace is a great place where people like to say, hey, these plants are all over my yard and I want to get rid of them. Come pick them up for free. That's another way invasives can be spread. And besides the plants, one thing to watch out for as well is your soil. I've had multiple landowners contact me that, hey, a neighbor brought in soil during construction, or I brought in soil and now I have this new plant taking over, and it turns out to be an invasive that was spread through contaminated soil. So you really want to be careful when you're spreading things around, whether it's plants, seeds, soil, anything like that. And a lot of our landscape plants are used because they don't have any natural enemies. These plants aren't being eaten regularly by insects. So 90% of our insects that feed on green plants are specialists. So they've evolved with a certain native plant or group of native plants, and they need those plants to support their life. So that brings us to our definition of what a native species is. And it's a plant or animal that has evolved in a given place over a period of time, and they've developed complex and essential relationships within their environment and given ecological community. So one example of that is the relationship between the Karner blue butterfly and wild lupin. Wild lupin was found all over in sandy habitat. I have it growing down here in wheat fields. We have sand. It's found all over the dunes. But unfortunately, it used to be more widespread because it needs an open prairie or savanna type habitat, and a lot of that is gone. So because of that, it's been, I don't know, about 8 years since we've seen a Karner blue butterfly. So as of now, we're saying the Karner blue is extirpated from Indiana. It is not extinct, it's found in other states. But this is just a great example of if we lose one species of plant, we could lose a wildlife species as well. So I said habitat alteration can affect not only our plants, but our whole food chain, our food web. Our birds eat our insects, and that is a lot of caterpillars for just one clutch of birds. So the adults, you may see them at feeders, they can eat seeds and other things to stay alive, but the chicks or babies do need caterpillars. They need those insects to survive. So do we have all those insects? It's hard to go outside and notice if we have as many insects as we used to, but I'm a little young to remember it, but I've had people tell me that when they were driving around in the 80s and 90s, their windshields used to be full of insects. And now if we drive at night, I mean, maybe there'll be a few, but it's not covered compared to what the stories I've heard. So that might be an indicator that we are losing a lot of insects, and we don't really pay attention and notice it. So this chart shows how our native plant species support those caterpillar species as well. Our oak trees, for example, support over 500 species of caterpillars or moths and butterflies. So just looking at this list, it really shows that our native trees and shrubs are going to support a lot of the caterpillars that our birds need to survive. And then in comparison, when we look at some of our invasives, for example, at the bottom, some of you might be familiar with Phragmites. It's that tall grass that grows along most of our interstates. In its native land, it supports 170 species, but it has been here for over 300 years and it still only supports 5. So it just shows it takes thousands and thousands of years for those species to evolve together to support one another. So our invasives and simply our non-natives are just not doing it. And our birds and insects are declining because of it. So you should plant some natives. You're going to get the same desirable features from our invasive plants, like beautiful blooms and ground cover, a fall and winter foliage color, your privacy and structure, and variety of colors of fruits, or variety of fruits with color. But on top of that, you're going to be supporting your local wildlife. And these plants are also adapted to grow in our region. So there's less maintenance, less watering, things like that. I mean, who wants to be out all summer watering their plants? I don't. And I love my native plants because they do well during all types of weather. And no worries if they escape a little bit. They might spread out, but they're not going to behave in a way that our invasives do. And I love this picture because it shows all the different native species you could have that flower throughout all the seasons. And even in the winter, we leave up our native plants just to provide shelter for the insects or any other wildlife that wants to take cover. And it kind of just provides an interesting background to see what the seeds look like and as they blow away. And then in the spring, we'll either burn it or you can mow it if you're not able to do that. And there's a blank slate for those plants to come back in the springtime and start all over again. These are just some examples of what you can do with native plants. A lot of people picture native plants growing crazy in a prairie and getting out of control, but you can really use them the same way you use any other plant. And the photo above with the monarch way station is a beautiful example of landscaping you can do. So let's get into some ID, and I'll talk about some alternatives to those. So I'll start with vines, and one of our invasive vines is Chinese wisteria. It's a climbing woody vine that can girdle trees. You're going to see these alternate compound leaves with 7 to 13 leaflets. And it has these beautiful showy purple-white flowers that grow in clusters. But we do have a native American wisteria that looks exactly the same with the same type of flowers. But the Chinese or invasive wisteria is going to have fuzzy pods, and the native is going to have smooth. So if you're looking at different wisterias, or maybe you have one in your yard right now and you're not sure which one it is, look at those seed pods. You'll be able to ID it that way. Another one that a lot of people have is Sweet Autumn Clematis. It's a climbing vine from Asia, and it has compound leaves with 3 to 5 leaflets and these white 4-petaled flowers. So the same as the wisteria, it does have a native species called Clematis virginiana, or virgin's bower. And the way you're going to tell these apart is the photos on the bottom show the invasive has these smooth, simple leaves, and the native has toothed leaves. So They still have the same beautiful flowers, just make sure you're planting the native one, and you can tell by those leaves. This one has actually been found up by the lake shore. These are your black and pale swallowworts. So they're a smaller vine that can grow kind of over smaller plants. You might see it vining around, but it has an opposite leaf arrangement. And from May to mid-July, you're gonna find these small fleshy clusters of flowers. And it is in the milkweed family, so you're gonna see the same seed pods as milkweeds. But because it's in the milkweed family, it attracts monarch butterflies to lay their eggs on it, but it is toxic. So unfortunately, it tricks the monarchs to lay their eggs there, and they do not survive. So this is not a plant we want here, kind of just wreaking havoc on our native wildlife. So not only is it toxic to our monarch butterflies, but also to cattle and deer. So just want to watch out for, if you do see this, be sure to report it. And some more native alternatives besides the wisteria and virgin's bower that I mentioned are crossvine and also American bittersweet. You probably know at the dunes, Oriental bittersweet is all over the place. We do have an American bittersweet, but I would be careful with it because it can hybridize with the Oriental, so it's a little tricky. You don't want those species growing closer together, but there is an American if you see that being sold. Going into our grasses, Chinese silvergrass or miscanthus, a very popular landscaping grass. It's a perennial that can grow up to 8 feet tall, has long leaves with a silver midrib, flower spikes that are 8 to 10 inches tall. And people like it because in the winter it has those silvery plumes. But the photo on top actually shows a picture that I took when I worked at Coffee Creek Watershed Preserve. The neighboring landowners had this planted in their landscaping, and I got to see firsthand how it spread right into the preserve. This was an area a couple 100 feet away around a pond in a natural area. So it does spread. And on top of that, if it spreads into a habitat or ecosystem that relies on fire or prescribed burns, people are not able to burn that area anymore until they get rid of this grass, because it burns so hot that it sterilizes all the soil around it and then nothing else will grow. So that was recently discovered, and it was kind of moving into prairie areas that needed to be burned so that trees can be kept out of it, and they were running into that issue. So this is really not one that we want escaping either. But there's so many great native grass alternatives, like little bluestem, prairie cordgrass, side oats grama, prairie dropseed, and Indian grass. I have prairie dropseed and little bluestem in my yard, and I love it. Moving on to shrubs, Japanese barberry. It has small, alternate, oval to spoon-shaped leaves that kind of grow in clusters above the spines. And it is a very spiny, prickly shrub, so not sure why you would want it in your landscaping, but it's been widely planted. And recently it has been linked to an increase in Lyme disease because it kind of creates this moist habitat underneath it that mice love. And for areas that have a lot of Japanese barberry, they've seen an increase in Lyme disease. So that's one I would not recommend having in your landscaping. Get rid of it. And actually, as of April 18th, it is on the terrestrial plant rule. For those that aren't familiar with that, Indiana just passed a rule that has 44 invasive species on it, Japanese barberry being one of them. So it is illegal for nurseries to sell it. You can't share it, transport it, anything like that. You can't move these plants around. So if you're interested in knowing other plants that are on that, I can share that, or just look up terrestrial plant rule for Indiana, and you can see all the species on there. So if you do see this in a nursery or someone sharing it, you can notify them, or also report it to Indiana DNR, Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. That's the DEPP. And they have employees that are going around and enforcing this rule. Another one is burning bush. It has small, opposite, elliptical leaves with pointed tips. And one way to ID it is from those distinct wing stems. So in the picture close up, you can kind of see those ridges or wings along the stem. We do have a native wahoo, or native euonymus burning bush. And it looks exactly the same, except it doesn't have those wings. So if you're looking for a native alternative, that's a great one that looks exactly like it. Another one is a heavenly bamboo, or nandina. I have not seen this one up north. It seems like it's planted more in the south. So if you guys have seen it, or maybe you have it in your own yard, definitely let me know. It has these clusters of small red berries, but those berries contain cyanide, and they're actually linked to the death of cedar waxwings and robins. They're toxic to not only our birds, but cats and other grazers. So yeah, this is just a nasty shrub that we definitely don't want to be feeding to our wildlife, especially our birds. Here's some native shrub alternatives. We have 9-bark, red osier dogwood, buttonbush, and witch hazel, American cranberry bush, chokecherry, sumac, and elderberry. Moving on to trees, we have our Callery pear, or Bradford or Cleveland pear, that I mentioned earlier. Basically, what you want to look at is that Latin name. They're all Pyrus calleriana. So it's a deciduous tree that grows to be about 30 feet tall. It has alternate leaves that are shiny and green, and a lot of people recognize them by those clusters of white flowers. It has an unpleasant odor, and it seems to be affected a lot by storms. They crack and fall down. So it's not really the greatest tree structurally anyway, but it produces these small brown fruits that the birds absolutely love. It has no nutritional value, but they still eat them because that's what's available. And the birds are spreading them like crazy, and that's why these trees are moving into our forests and outcompeting our native trees. Another tree that's invasive is our Norway maple. I was actually at a property the other day, and they were having maple trees pop up all over the place, and it was because of one big Norway maple in the back was spreading them all over their yard. So new ones were popping up. But probably the easiest way to tell this one apart, it looks like your typical maple tree, and it might be tricky to tell it apart from our natives. So if you pull a leaf off, it's going to have milky sap that comes out. So our native maples do not have that milky sap, but the Norway maple does. So I'll just leave it at that. That's the easiest way to identify it. We have some great native tree alternatives. Eastern redbud is flowering now. I love seeing that in the spring. We have our native oaks, native maples, hawthorn species, and serviceberries are a great alternative to the Callery pears because they have those white flowers too. And I didn't mention much about our herbaceous species, but I did want to just have some pictures of some natives for different habitats. These are great for dry spaces your purple coneflower, wild columbine, monarda or bee balm, black-eyed Susan, New Jersey tea, partridge pea, and butterfly weed. I love butterfly weed as a great milkweed for monarchs, but it's orange and I don't know, there's nothing else like it. And then for wet habitats, you have your marsh blazing star, ironweed, cardinal flower is great for hummingbirds, blue vervain, swamp milkweed, and Joe Pye weed. So how can you help? It might be a little overwhelming, so I just recommend do one thing and start there. You'll really start learning a lot from others as you get involved, and you'll just build on it from there. So I had mentioned these invasive species groups that are forming all over the state, and they're called CISMAs, or Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas. And they're a group that has just a bunch of partners. It could be anyone from the universities or anyone interested in native plants, especially landowners. We love landowners to be involved because they're the ones that are out there working in their yards and planting these plants. So it's just a group of people that further invasive species education and do work days and fun events just to get the word out about why we need to be planting natives. So if you are interested to see what your county is doing, definitely let me know and I can fill you in on where they're at in forming that group. Maybe you don't know what invasive species you have in your yard. We do free landowner surveys, so all the regional specialists in the state do that, depending on where you're located. And we just come to your property, we'll list all the invasive plants you have and also point out the good ones that you want to keep. We'll write up a whole management plan for you and just help you along the way and the best ways to manage those species and what other steps you need to do in moving forward. And with that, there's different eradication methods. You might be hand pulling or digging or cutting. Sometimes you may need herbicide. Some of these plants, you can't pull them or cut them. The root systems go a million miles away, so you have to kill that root system. But one thing to remember is don't compost them. You don't want to compost those invasives and potentially spread seeds. Also, if you are moving anything, you want to bag it so that it's contained. And one thing I think a lot of people forget is clean up afterwards, and that includes yourself. Maybe you were in an infested area and your shoes have seeds all over them or your clothes do. Make sure you remove those seeds or spray off your shoes or something like that to prevent invasives from spreading. You could participate in a weed wrangle. These are just events that help to educate the public in how to ID invasives and how to remove them, but you get to go out in a group together and do it. So this spring and summer, we were supposed to have a lot, but with everything going on, people can't really get together. So be on the lookout for maybe some of those in the fall and definitely next year. In native landscaping, this is a picture of my house and the native landscaping we have in front. And the Indiana Native Plant Society, if you go on their website, you can enroll in a program where you enter all the native species that you have and take some pictures of your property. And they will send you this really cool sign that you could put in your yard that says you grow Indiana natives. So I just want to leave you guys with a quote by Doug Talmy. As gardeners and stewards of our land, we have never been so empowered to help save biodiversity from extinction, and the need to do so has never been so great. All we need to do is plant native plants. So I love how simple he makes that. And if you haven't read Bringing Nature Home, that's a great resource. Doug Talmy does a lot of talks about having native plants in your yard and how they support our native species. So if you want more information, I definitely recommend